And welcome back, fourth and long fans. It's your footy correspondent, Coach Donnie Hess here, back with another episode of my Aussie fan supporter series. And today, ladies and gentlemen, we have Miss Kat Oxley. Kat, all the way from Melbourne. Kat, how are you doing?
I'm going really, really well. How are you going today?
I am not doing too bad. I have the pleasure of talking with you, get to talk some footy and eventually your club, which the people watching YouTube probably already figured out what club you are, but we'll get to that just a little bit. But when I start my episodes, I like kind of knowing just a little bit about the person that I'm talking with outside of the game of footy. So if you want just a real quick bio of who Kat is.
Oh, okay. Well, my name's Katrina. I born and bred Melbourne. I'm actually a school teacher, high school teacher. I've interested in photography. I've done a bit of acting. I've done all sorts of different things. I actually teach high school media, and I'm doing my master's at the moment as well in digital learning. Yeah, so I've lived in different places around Victoria, but back in my hometown of Melbourne now. So it's I'm really enjoying it.
Home is where the heart is for sure. And being in Melbourne, the heart of footy, I got to ask, what is your favorite thing about the sport of football?
I think it's a sense of community that it has, particularly here in Melbourne. People talk about Melbourne being, I guess the sports capital of Australia, really. And it's no exaggeration when people say that football in particular is really like a religion here in this city. It's very difficult to go through a day, even in the off season, without having a conversation with someone about footy. It really is like that. I've been, when you go to other places around Australia, it's not like that. It's really like that here in Melbourne, though. But it's definitely that sense of community, I think. And I think the sport itself, the game itself, is quite an exciting game to watch. It's high
I
energy. Yeah, it's constantly on the go. It's not, yeah, it's just really an enjoyable. It's a fantastic spectator sport, and I read somewhere that it's the fourth highest domestic attendance of any sporting league in the world, I think. And I would believe that because, some of the higher memberships that you'll get in club membership, you'll see in AFL clubs. It really does permeate in our lifestyle here.
Yeah, I completely agree. One of my favorite things about the sport is just the passionate fans. And the last couple of years have been difficult not having all the fans in the stands. I'm hoping everything is on the up and up for sure. So I'm gonna take you back a little bit. Can you remember your earliest footballing memory?
I don't remember the very first game I went to because I was so little when we first started going to the football. I remember deciding, as a kid, am I going to follow mum's team, which was Hawthorn, or dad's team, which was Melbourne? Because mum's family, all of them are pretty much Hawthorn supporters. The main games that we went to were the Melbourne and Hawthorn games. I do remember sitting in the grandstands of the MCG as a little kid with my siblings and with my cousins and with my mum and dad and my Uncle Alan and Auntie Pam, specifically at the Melbourne Hawthorn games. They're probably my earliest memories of going to the football. Is definitely the MCG and definitely with family with Melbourne and Hawthorn.
Not a bad thing. You kind of previewed a little bit my next question, but we'll still go with it. For those that are watching the YouTube, they've already seen who is your club, and then kind of why do you support them?
My team is Melbourne. Football is it's football following a footy team here in Melbourne. It's very much an ancestral thing. You do generally follow the team that your parents follow. In my family, my dad was Melbourne, as I was saying before. My mum was Hawthorn. So of myself and my two other siblings, out of the three kids, my brother and I both followed dad, and my sister followed Hawthorn with my mum. And I think the main reason why I chose Melbourne, because we were given the choice as kids as we wanted to follow. I think the main reason, there's a couple of reasons why I think chose Melbourne. Is one was I could sense that dad was much more interested in football than mum was. Mm-hmm. So I figured if I, had wanted to have opportunities to go to the game, I might as well go with dad's team. I also really looked up to my big brother. He was kind of, he was sort of my, childhood protector sort of thing, being my brother. So I wanted to follow him along as well. Julia, my sister, like mum, wasn't really into football that much at all. It's still not really. But she still, has a heart to Hawthorn. But it was just really because I was always daddy's little girl too, I suppose, was probably the third reason. But I do remember swaying a little bit. Did I want to go from Hawthorn? Did I want to go from Melbourne in my early primary school days? But heart always went back to Melbourne, I think.
Not a
So
problem. Not a problem there. I kind of always wonder this, and I love the family stories because those are always great. But do you think there was any way that anybody in the family wanted to go for a different team besides Hawthorn or Melbourne? It was always kind of, we'll go with what our parents follow.
oh no, I was actually having this conversation yesterday at work with a colleague. That is just something that you just do not do in Aussie rules. You do not change your allegiance. That's seen as a sacrilegious thing you do. You just do not do that. So there was never any question, although there have been times my paternal grandfather actually grew up in Bendigo, which is a town probably a couple of hours north of Melbourne, but he grew up in Essendon supporter. But because he married my grandmother, who was born above the family shop in Hawthorn, they grew up she lived in, my mum grew up in Canberra. They are so emphatically Hawthorn that my grandfather pretty much had no choice but to change from Essendon to Hawthorn, really. But that's probably, and my sister-in-law, my brother's wife, she spent, she's from New Zealand. So when she first came to Australia, she was coerced by her school friends to go for Collingwood. So when she first started dating Andrew, he said, well, if you want to go any further, you have to change teams and go from Hawthorn. And
I
she did.
love it.
Yeah, that's what she did.
That
so,
is
um, so yeah, pretty much my brother's entire family, kids and everything, were all Melbourne.
that is fantastic. I love those stories. It's like, nope, we're not dating anymore unless you're at least on my team. That is awesome. I love that. So we'll stay in the past just a little bit longer. Can you remember? And I know this won't be easy. Can you remember the first club item, the first Demons item that you ever got or were given as a child or maybe even older if necessary?
I'm actually wearing it. When I was about 10, um, I saved up for ages and ages and ages. My sister was given a Hawthorn scarf for her birthday that year, and I saved up for ages from my pocket money and things like that to buy my own Melbourne scarf. And I remember the day when I was about 10. This is 1981, going to the sports shop at Vermont South and handing over my $12 for this. So this is it. Uh, and I've kept it. So this is definitely, and you can tell it's old because it's still got the old VFL logo on it. And
Mhm.
it's also royal blue because Melbourne, when colour television first started in Australia in the early 70s, some of the teams actually changed their colours because I thought it would look better on colour. So Melbourne actually went from navy blue to royal blue in the early 70s, but reverted back to the navy blue in 87. So this was from the early 80s when they were during that royal blue period.
That's a great story. Absolutely love that. Would enjoy that since you bought that at such a young age. Can you describe your fandom? And for me, this is how big a supporter are you? I mean, do you wake up at all hours? Do you watch the games every single game? You never leave. You always go to the games, or are you kind of one of those? I go when I go. If I miss a game, it's okay.
I've been a member consecutively. I mean, my father first bought a family membership for myself and my brother and for him in the late 70s, in about 1979. There was a few years ago, Melbourne actually printed on the year that you were first a member, and mine said on it 1979. So I figured I would have been about 8 years old. And I asked Dad about it, and they said, oh yeah, there would have been a year I bought a family membership for us. But I've been a member consecutively now since I was 14. Um, So it actually says on it I've renewed my membership already for next year. Yes, I do go to all the games. I'm a Redlegs member, which is a premium membership in there. So we get our own bay at the MCG, and we get our own room as well. So you can have like a counter type meal and a glass of wine or a beer or whatever with it. So you can have like a plate of pasta or something like that. And it's got a big room at the MCG as well. So you can actually sit in the warmth if you wanted to, or go out and sit in the bay amongst the spectators, which is generally behind the goals. We've been in Redlegs since the late 80s. So it's got that premium membership. I'm also an AFLW member. I was a foundation member of the women's team. Absolutely passionate. I'm so proud of my club that they're a foundation, not only of the game itself, because Melbourne were the ones who, of course, drew up the initial rules of the game, but also with Bulldogs being the foundation of the women's team. I'm really proud of my club for doing that. So my name's on the website as well as being one of the 500 foundation members. I've been in cheer squad. I still am in cheer squad, and my nephews are in cheer squad as well. So you could say I am. I do go to all the games. Even when I was living in the country, I still maintained my Redlegs membership as well. So so it probably broke my heart this year that we couldn't go to the finals, but because it was in Perth because of the lockdown here. But that was the last couple of years not being able to go to the games and watching them on TV were particularly hard, really. But I'm glad that next year we'll be able to get back to normal a bit now that we've got the vaccination rates.
I sure hope so. I mean, it was one of the things, and we can discuss it a little bit more. But I was one of those that with Melbourne breaking the streak, it was bittersweet for members like you who have been around for so long, have had so much heartbreak over the years, and for the one time you win a premiership and it's not in Victoria, that was definitely one of those. You felt for those members. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a little bit. So I know this won't be easy. Can you remember the first game you remember attending of the Demons?
Oh, look, not specifically. I mean, I was a kid. I couldn't really pinpoint the very first time. I was thinking about this, because I mean, people have been talking about the first time they've been to the MCG or first time they went to a footy game. And I actually can't specifically pinpoint because it was such an ingrained part of our lives as children. I can't specifically remember the first time, but I do remember, wearing my footy scarves to school, the times that Melbourne would win or whatever, or even just generally. I do remember my first grand final that I went to, which was the 88 grand final when Melbourne lost by 96 points. But I just genuinely remember it being a major part of my childhood and my growing up.
Yeah, and that's
but I do remember going to the suburban games. I used to enjoy going to the suburban grounds. It was one thing I was always really jealous of because Melbourne's home ground was always the MCG, which is not exactly a suburban ground. It's always had the capacity of over 100,000 people when I was a kid even. And, but, when we go to, say, my best friend at school was a Bulldog supporter. So I remember going out to, when I was about 15 or 16, going out to Western Oval to see Melbourne and Footscray play, as they were called, Footscray in those days. And that sense of community. I remember going to those suburban games and feeling that pang of jealousy that Melbourne didn't have that same kind of suburban ground feel, because they were a lot of fun. I remember going out to Arden Street when I was a little kid to see Melbourne play North Melbourne. I remember going out to Windy Hill when we would play Essendon, and they were pretty wild times out there. Some of those supporters out there were quite wild. I remember in the 90s going to Victoria Park, and that was the one time. That was only one time I've ever went to Victoria Park, and I vowed never to go back there again because that's a truly terrifying experience. But those kind of memories, you don't see that because we don't really have the suburban grounds anymore, and that's really the lovely thing about women's footy, I think, is that those suburban grounds are being used again.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I one of the things I have loved about the AFLW is seeing those games at Arden Street, seeing him at Victoria Park and in some of the smaller grounds, even Casey when it comes to it with Melbourne a little bit. So we'll keep, yeah, we'll keep it up on this. This is never an easy question for some because it's like choosing your favorite child. And I've stated this. Can you think of your favorite player of the past, and do you have a favorite player currently on the Demons list?
I grew up in the Robbie Flower era. Robbie Flower was a bit of a Melbourne legend. I don't know if you've heard of him before. He was played for Melbourne from the early 70s, and he retired in his mid 30s after the 1987 final series. But he was a very, very slightly built, very wiry guy, not a particularly tall. I think it was only about 5'9". But he was one of the most sensational wing players I remember seeing in my lifetime. So growing up, it was definitely Robbie Flower. And I have a distinct memory. He used to run a sports store at Forest Hill, which is not that far away from where I grew up in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. And his actually family home was in Vermont South as well, which is where I lived. And my brother gave me one of his old Melbourne jumpers, one of the old woolen ones. And so Dad one summer took me, I was about 10, took me over to the Forest Hill shops because I didn't know it was Robbie Flower's sports shop, and to put the number on the back of the jumper. And I remember going into the shop with Dad, and there was Robbie Flower behind the counter, and I was that gobsmacked I couldn't speak. And he would ask me what we were after, and I handed him my jumper, and I couldn't ask him, could you put a jumper on the back? So Dad asked more for me. And I remember Robbie Flower asking, what number would you like? And I was that embarrassed because I wanted number 2, which was his number. And I was too embarrassed to say that. And so Dad's the sense, I was sitting there going, and Dad, number 2, please. And so he took the jumper and he ironed on the number 2 and everything, and it came off the slate, and he autographed the number 2 slate for me. And I was just so spellbound that I just couldn't believe that just happened. So definitely Robbie Flower was one of my players. I think Jim Steins is also up there as well, which is a bit after him. I think his story was just remarkable, and what he was doing in the community afterwards is, it's a story that you couldn't really make up. Current player. Oh, this is a tough one.
Too many to choose from, right?
Yeah, because I mean, we just won a premiership, and the other thing is that with Melbourne at the moment, I remember Dad telling me as a kid, a champion team would always beat a team of champions, and what he meant by that, and I never really understood what he meant by that, but it occurred to me in the last couple of years exactly what he meant by that, and that, no one in Melbourne really acts like a big star, but they work cohesively together, and now they've shaped themselves up to be a champion team. So it's really hard to really pinpoint. Ooh. Look, I don't think I can really go past Max Gawn, to be honest. What he's done is with his leadership at there, and his story since he was drafted through to today, and the adversity he came through as well. To, any other club probably would have given up on a young player who wasn't putting in 110% of us, but I suppose Philadelphia 76ers are feeling this at the moment with Ben Simmons, another, prodigal sort of talent. That was Max Gawn when he was younger. He wasn't really putting in the effort. He wasn't really, but he had an absolute, huge talent, but the club stuck by him, and, so, hopefully Philadelphia will stick by the Ben Simmons, because I think that he could wind up having a similar kind of story.
We'll have to see. I know that there's several people over here that have said if Philadelphia can find a way to get something decent for him, that he is, it might not be. We'll see. But this is a footy podcast, not a basketball podcast,
Yeah,
which is fine.
Right, yeah.
Not a problem at all. But I'm gonna ask this question. I'm pretty sure I know the answer. Most memorable moment as a supporter.
Well, the grand final. Melbourne, yeah, definitely that one, although it would have been fantastic to have been there. Moments at the MCG, there will be quite a few. I still remember, I have fantastic memories of, would have been about 1993 or 1994, the day that Alan Jakovich kicked 11 goals against North Melbourne. That was definitely a memorable moment. The day that, I think it was in 2008, I think it was about round 11, I think it was, against Fremantle, when Melbourne came from about nearly 60 points down at half time and had this sensational comeback in the second half and won by 2 goals. Dad and I were screaming ourselves hoarse. But I think from a personal level, one of my favourite memories would have been the last time I took my dad to the football field before he passed away, which was around 23 in 2018. That memory holds a very special place in my heart too.
And those are always the good ones. Those are the ones that you'll never forget. And having a family member connected to that. Yeah, so those will never be erased. So I kind of previewed that one a little bit though. So next question is thoughts on last season. Well, it's hard to argue that Melbourne didn't have the best season you could possibly have. They won the flag. So how happy are you as a Demons supporter with last year, your D's ending their drought and winning a premiership?
Yeah, well, really good. I mean, it's a dream come true. I mean, for 50 years, I'm 50 years old. For 50 years, I've ended a footy season with, oh, well, next year. And it does still feel surreal. I think the hardest thing here is because we've only just come out of lockdown in the last day here in Melbourne, and we still haven't had a chance really to celebrate it. And it sounds really odd to say that, because it's been nearly a month ago that it happened. In fact, it's a month ago today. I think it's 4 weeks ago today it happened, and we haven't had that chance to celebrate it. We were in lockdown. We even had a curfew. We couldn't even leave the house. I did go to my brother's house to watch it because I live on my own. I didn't want to watch the grand final on my own. We went through the final season having Zoom meets with members of the cheer squad, so we could actually still have that connection with each other. But it was bittersweet, as you were saying before, and in some ways it still doesn't feel real. And it occurred to me the other day, the main reason why it doesn't feel real is because we haven't had that chance to really celebrate it yet. So yeah, while I was absolutely thrilled and tickled pink, it was still devastating that we couldn't go. And I think for that 2-week period between the prelim and the grand final, there wasn't a day where I didn't burst into tears at some stage, because I was so desperately sad that I couldn't go, because that was the dream, is to actually see Melbourne. I'm getting teary now thinking
Not a
that
problem.
we couldn't do it. And so I think that and the players are fully aware of this too. It's one thing that really struck me, is that the players are absolutely fully conscious of the effect that this has had on the supporters, and leading up to the finals as well, and throughout the whole year, every time you see a player interviewed, they always mention the members, they always mention the supporters, and they're driven now. It's one thing to win the grand final, but to do it on their home turf at the MCG in front of their own supporters, I think that's their next goal, because that was the missing link this year.
I completely agree. And I think next year they are definitely, if they keep this list healthy, they are definitely a challenge for next season. Because they had magic in a bottle this year. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind on that. So we jumped to it. We've been through a little bit of the off season, not all of it. We've been to the free agency period. We've been to the trade period. Have you been keeping an eye on it at all? And then if so, I mean, what do you think of Melbourne's off season? Do you think they've done pretty well? Kind of what are your thoughts on their off season?
Well, Melbourne were pretty quiet. I was expecting Melbourne to be pretty quiet during the trade season. There was not really, I mean, the last couple of years they've been very, very clever. I've got a full credit to Jason Taylor, who's the main, the list manager at Melbourne, because the last couple of years, as far as the draft, as far as trading, he's been sensational. And even the magical things of being able to trade to get higher up in the draft order in the last few years, like even this year we managed to do it too, and managed to get a first round draft pick, which was just, whoa, because that was traded a couple of years ago, or last year even, to get Ben Brown. And so I thought, oh man, I've got to get our first draft pick until about pick 35. And all of a sudden, we've got pick 17. So that in itself, full credit for him to be able to do that. The draft is coming up in December. It'll be interesting to see whether there's a couple of father-son prospects that, Melbourne will be interested in, with Taj Woden, who's the son of Shane Woden, who was in the side in the late 90s, early 2000s, and in fact won the Brownlow medal in the year 2000, which was the last year before this year that Melbourne made the grand final. And there's also Wiz's son, Kobe Farmer, who could be a prospect. I don't know how. I think most people seem to be talking about Taj Woden ahead of Farmer, but it'll be really, I imagine the forward line having both Farmer and Cosy Pickett together.
That'd be a scary thought process. This is there, definitely.
But yeah, he's got the option also of Fremantle too, because Jeff Farmer also played over 100 games at Freo as well. So, and there's and the other person that I think that Melbourne probably be looking at too would be Mac Andrew, who was their academy kid from out in the Dandenong area. But they've changed the rules so that particularly for Indigenous and multicultural the academy area kids, you can't bid on them, and if they're coming to fall in the first 20 places in the draft. So which means there's a very, very real chance that Melbourne will miss out on him, which is, it's a crazy rule, because where's the incentive for clubs to put in the investment and training and development of these kids, which they had with Mac Andrews since the age of 13 or 14, if they can't even draft them? It just seems stupid. But yeah, looks like another AFL club will getting the benefits of that Melbourne put all the hard work in, which just seems stupid. But hopefully he's still available at pick 17, but I don't think he will be, sadly.
We'll have to see. They make some of the rule changes. They make for some of the most interesting situations. It's very, very fascinating. The NGA, the New Generation Academy, is one of those. I just really wish they would make up their minds what they want to do with it. Like it's very frustrating to kind of not really know how that's going to go. So we'll go from that. Is I'm not one, like, I'm one of those. I hate seeing. For me, I hate saying expectations. Like I think it puts like a certain thing to it. So I don't want to say expectations, but what are your kind of thinkings of how your team's going to do next year? Do you think you're another flag contender? Are you just kind of, I'll see game by game?
It's funny you asked a Melbourne supporter that, because we're so used to, getting our hopes up and then being let down again. It's happened year after year after year. So it's finally got a premiership. Expectations, I'd love to see back-to-back. I wouldn't be confident being a Melbourne supporter. I'm not confident enough to say that it's going to happen, but it would be lovely to see that happen. Yeah, I think they'll feature well next year. It'll be an absolute bonus if we can get back to back, but who knows? Who knows?
I'll say this: the 8's going to be fun to make next year, because there are a lot of really, really good footy teams next year. The scary part is Richmond may be back healthy. You guys are going to be tough. I think Port's going to be just as good. I think Freo's a team to keep an eye on. Who knows how Sydney's going to do? GWS, Geelong. There's 12 teams right now I can sit here that I can pencil in that can make the finals.
I think Geelong might have. I think the time of their era might be coming to, because they are very much an aging list.
They're close.
They've traded a lot away. They've traded away a lot of their young kids and didn't give much of their young kids a go this year. But I don't know what's going on there. But I'm wondering whether Geelong have sort of blown that window a little bit. They had a very successful period from about 2009 through to this year, and I'm just wondering whether or not the end of that era is ended. I think Richmond, you're right. I think they'll come back next year, because I think the main factor why they didn't feature so well this year is because last year it was such a late end of the season. They didn't really have much of a preseason at all. And I think that really did hurt them. Freo, I'd love it to see Freo. The two teams that I would love to see win premierships in the next few years, and that would be St Kilda and Freo. I think their times, definitely. I'd love for St Kilda in particular to experience what Melbourne supporters have gone through, because they went through a similar sort of length drought. And Freo, I've got so much respect for Freo and their supporters. They put up with so much crap in the West. They really do, from the media, from West Coast Eagles supporters. They really do. And I've got some good friends who are Freo supporters, and I'd love for them to experience. I gave my myself and two other friends as well, who are in Ruby Demons, which is the support group for LGBTI supporters. And in fact, I'm meeting with them tomorrow for lunch. Three of us gave our barcodes to a friend of mine in Perth, who's a Freo supporter, and she represented us at the grand final. And I was so thrilled for her, because she got to experience a grand final. But she printed up a big poster-sized photo of the three of us wearing our Ruby Demons t-shirts from one of the women's games earlier in the year from the summer, and paraded around Perth, and represented us. It's like she wound up with an empty seat next to her, so she propped the poster up on the seat next to her, so we could watch the game from the seat.
That's awesome.
So we had a presence at stadium. So I'd love it for her to be able to experience what we experienced this year. So she was cheering for Melbourne, of course, because I sent up a couple of old member scarves to her so she could wear the red and blue. My kind of thought was, well, red and blue, mix it together, you get purple. So
I love it.
Decals.
That works so much. All right, so towards the end, I have a few fun questions I like to ask. I'm gonna do something really fun, is especially over here in the States. We love general managing. We love saying what we would do, how we would trade. So we're going to do something really fun. I'm going to install you as Melbourne's list manager as we speak right now. The other 17 clubs, every player is available. Who is the first person you bring on to Melbourne's list from one of the other 17 clubs in the competition?
Ooh.
And why?
Oh, good question. What does Melbourne need at the moment?
It can make an embarrassment of riches.
Maybe another small forward could be good. Maybe Cody Waitman, just as an extra small forward.
That'd be a nice one. That'd be a very nice one. Yeah. I think that would be a good one.
Our midfield is chockers. Our defense is chockers. I wouldn't want to give up any of those blokes.
Well, if you wanted another goal snake, speaking personally, I think Tommy Papley would fit in well at Melbourne.
True. Yeah, he could too. Because we've got a couple of really good forwards there now. Being we've got Wiedemann, we've got Brown, we've got Tom McDonald. I know it seemed to be working really, really well together. And I was a little bit worried about our forward line halfway through this season, whether, particularly after the Essendon game when we scrapped through, really. I remember thinking at the time, unless we get our forward line sorted, we're not going to win a premiership. Boy, did they get it sorted. I mean, we've got people like Bailey Fritsch, who has just been a surprise packet. I was not expecting Fritter to wind up being as dominant. I mean, he's not a big bloke. He's small, he's wiry, yet he can take these sensational marks, which, defies the size of him, really. He's tougher than he looks.
I definitely agree. We'll move on to my next question. I'm pretty
Oh,
sure I know that. I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this question. Just for fun, the grand final has seen the last 2 years outside of Victorian soil, and I know for some people this has caused some discussion. This has caused some people to go, well, maybe. As a Melburnian, for you, is it tradition that it must be at the MCG, or is there even a little part of you that wouldn't mind occasionally seeing the grand final travel outside of Victoria?
to be honest, I'm of the opinion that it would be good to see it occasionally out of Melbourne. However, one thing that has been shown is that in the last couple of years at the Gabba and at Perth Stadium, is that it's an absolute struggle holding it in a stadium smaller than the MCG. Because even at the MCG, it's a real struggle to be able to get everyone in who wanted to go. And I think Perth people realise that this year, that Optus Stadium is, it's just, it's only a 60,000 seat stadium, and even with Melbourne and Bulldogs members getting in, I mean, that was the first grand final I remember seeing in a long time where general admission seats were ever made available at a grand final. And if we had been able to, if borders were open between states, there's absolutely no doubt it would have been flocked. It would have been a far worse situation. Already we had a lot of Perth people complaining that they couldn't get tickets to the grand final. Well, welcome to Melbourne. That happens every year in Melbourne, even with a 100,000 seat stadium in the city of nearly, just under 5 million people. We cannot get into the MCG, even if we wanted to. There's 3 different levels of memberships. I'm priority 1 with my membership, which means that, if Melbourne are participating, I'm guaranteed access to be able to buy a grand final ticket. Then there's priority 2 and priority 3. Priority 2 is what the majority of members would be. And then priority 3 are things like the armchair members or, interstate members and things like that. They've got virtually no chance of being able to get access through their membership to get a grand final ticket if their team's in. Priority 2, a very small number would be able to get in. So even with that, even in the stadium the size of the MCG, I mean, you've got clubs like Richmond that's got 100,000 members. That is the size of the MCG. There's every year, even at the MCG, at a grand final, you would have probably an allocation of about 25,000 to each of the members of the 2 participating clubs. Now, obviously, if your club has got a smaller number of members, you've got a greater chance of being able to get in. But if you're a club like Richmond, you're going to find it tough. So this year in Perth, where there's 60,000 people, I was kind of blown away that, hey, they're able to sell general admission. I've never seen that before in my entire life. It's always been a case of, even if you're a member of a club, you're really, really lucky if you're able to go to the grand final. And that's probably one of the reasons why we have kept our red legs alive, because it has got that priority 1. Yes, it does cost a lot more. I think I've renewed my membership for next year with all those add-ons and everything. I've paid my membership next year is going to be close to $1,000, but yeah, I know, which is a normal season ticket type membership is probably more like about 150 to 200. But that's also for my memberships for my nephews as well. But yeah, I think, I would love to see it in other states, but realistically, it's probably not going to be likely because it's the only 100,000 seat stadium in the country.
Okay.
Yeah,
and there's no right or wrong answer. It's just it was definitely interesting to hear. Like, I listened to Triple M, occasionally listen to some of the podcasts, and it was surprising how many Victorian media people were like, I didn't mind this being outside of Victoria. I wouldn't mind seeing the grand final in, say, Adelaide every 5 years. And I understand that. But then one of the things that I've brought up with a few friends of mine is I've heard everybody say this, well, not everybody can get in. Well, to be completely honest with you, I think everybody in the world knows the Super Bowl. Okay. Everybody in the world knows the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl every year moves stadiums. It's never in the same place 2 years in a row. And here's my explanation to most of them. Usually the Super Bowl, the biggest stadium that's ever had the Super Bowl, because it needs to be in a dome now in case of the weather, because with it being in January in some parts of the country, The weather's not good to be outside. The smallest that I've seen was 50,000 for a Super Bowl. Okay. And here's the thing, as we kind of discussed, Australia is a lot smaller than the US. So my argument to that is when everybody's like, well, not everybody can get tickets. Well, that's the way life is. I mean, I know it's a little bit different because of memberships compared to the US doesn't have memberships. It's billion-dollar owners
Yeah,
and it's
clubs
season
are
ticket holders.
owned, aren't they, rather than membership based?
Exactly. So it is a little bit different, but my thing is this, it's like, you know what? That's the world. I mean, there's tons of people that want to go to the Super Bowl. There's probably over 100 million people here in the States that want to go to the Super Bowl that will never go to the Super Bowl because they don't have a way to get a hold of the tickets, or the $2,000, $3,000 per ticket price that they're going to put on that is not possible for most people. So
Yeah.
it's I
I
think
think
that's kind of the
yeah,
argument. And
I think
I
that's
know it's a
also in some
completely
way.
different thing.
Yeah, I think in some ways, yeah, you're right in that sense. But that's also, I'm wondering how much of that is a cultural difference between
Exactly.
sports in America to sports in Australia, because sports in Australia has always been treated as very much an inclusive thing, that you've got an opportunity to be able to participate. And I think that's why the clubs, the membership type system here has been so successful in that sense, because they are member owned. They're not and they're not privately owned clubs like you see overseas, like with the Premier League in America or whatever. As members, we have voting rights. We vote in our board and all that kind of stuff. And it's actually the board that, it's got that whole kind of governance versus management type system that you'll see in and they are not-for-profit organisations too. Even though there's millions of money that flies around with the Australian Football League, they are still not-for-profit. So the money, any profit that they do make, goes back into the club, or it be used to benefit the members. We're seeing the sort of shareholders, if you like, in the club, even though they are not-for-profit organisations in that sense. So, and I think that that's the cultural difference, is that is the first and foremost is the fans here, which is probably a different thing to in America, but it's not seen as the corporate dollar thing. It is what is the benefit for the fans. But going back to what you were saying beforehand, a lot of interstate, I mean, it's so funny that people talking about people from outside of Victoria being the interstaters, but yeah, interstate footy fans do tend, particularly South Australians, West Australians, they have this conception that Victorians don't want to have a national competition, that, because, they'll argue that the AFL ended the day that they changed its name to the AFL, and they'll treat it as a totally different competition. Whereas in actual fact, all that happened in 1990 was a name change. But they'll have this preconception that we don't want the, interstate teams in the AFL, which is a load of bollocks, really. Let's face it. We do. We don't have a problem with that. But I don't understand why there seems to be a lot of almost hate towards Victorians from, in particular from South Australia. When I went over to South Australia, went to Adelaide during the year to see Melbourne play Adelaide Crows, there was an absolute hate towards Victorians over there, and I was mind blown by it. And they seem to have this conception that we're anti the idea of anything interstate encroaching on their league. We're not, but what I think what we do have an issue with sometimes is when interstate people try and saying, well, what about us, or this thing, they forget that there's 100 years of history with the league before there were the interstate teams. And there's that, it almost feels like a lack of respect for that. This is like, well, Melbourne's premierships did, 12 premierships before this year don't count because it's before it's nationalised. Sorry, they do count because they did happen. It was part of the competition. You don't write off other clubs' histories because you decide to, come in, in the last 5 minutes of the league and say, we own it now. It's got to be a shared history thing here.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of misconceptions on both sides too. Like, and this is, maybe this is because I have several friends that are Sydney fans, and we'll quickly chat to this and then we'll move on. Sure, not a problem. Absolutely. Is that one of the biggest issues that I have occasionally, and maybe it's because of Sydney Swans fans, is because a majority of the callers are based in Victoria. So a lot of their conversations are Victorian based. And this is not me bashing Victorian announcers. I'm not. But there does come to be a point where it's like if a Victorian team's doing bad and an out of Victorian team is doing well, the announcers tend to only focus on how bad the Victorian team is instead of maybe giving props to the out of state team.
Yeah, that does happen.
And that's not the fans' fault. And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions that I see. That I try to have fans in each of the trying to have friends and fans in each of the different clubs, because I like having communications like, how are you feeling about things? Because there's a ton of times that I've seen some tensions, and I'm like, I'm trying to be somebody that I can see it both sides. I can see it from your side that there's a ton of history, because so many of all the older clubs are in because of the VFL, the way it started. And then you do have the new teams that it's like, well, we want to be respected too. Like, we may not have the history, but we want to be respected as a club too. So it's a little bit of give and take on both sides. So
Sydney is a little bit different because it came from that wasn't a new club. That Sydney came from as a relocation from South Melbourne.
Yep.
And I do think that Sydney fans do recognise there is that history before that relocation that happened in '82. Because I'm old enough to remember South Melbourne. I'm old enough to remember I was about 11 when that relocation happened, and it was a major culture shock because it was the first time that there was a non-Victorian team in the competition, but also the fact that it was actually bringing in a non-footy state into the competition, because we were talking before the interview started that how Queensland and New South Wales, with their rugby league backgrounds, are not traditionally footy states. So, but I do think, and so hence there's a lot of Sydney fans still based in Melbourne because they grew up as South Melbourne supporters. Same with Brisbane, and because I am heartbroken at the loss of Fitzroy, because that was my nana's team. She grew up around the corner from the Brunswick Street Oval. She grew up a Fitzroy supporter, and that the history of that club is gone now, and they won 9 flags or something like that during their history. They've got Brownlow medals and things like that. And it does kind of sting sometimes that, they talk about Brisbane Lions premierships and only talk about the 3. Well, what about the 9 that happened under Fitzroy? Do they not get inherited? I mean, Sydney's premierships are South Melbourne's premierships are counted in Sydney's tally. So should Fitzroy's in Brisbane Lions, because that came out of that merger.
I completely agree. You aren't going to hear any argument from me on that one.
But I think that a lot of people do kind of sting from interstate, that a lot of the focus does seem to be in Victoria. But you've got to remember, 10 of the 18 clubs are still based in Victoria.
Touche. And again, I don't think there's a wrong answer. I think both sides need to kind of tame down a little bit and kind of try to see it from both sides, because we can
I do empathize with that. And there are times when when Port Adelaide say, well, if the VFL premierships have got to be included, then say do the 37 premierships that Port Adelaide won in Sandford. I said, well, not really, because that is a totally different league.
That is a great argument. That is an absolutely valid argument.
1990 was a name change.
Exactly. Because there was already a Magpies with Collingwood, and we won't get into that. Okay, so my next question in this, and you kind of already answered it, and I love this, as I'm a massive AFLW fan. I really fell in love with the league this year. In fact, I will, full disclosure here, I was fully supporting Melbourne by the time the finals came on, because I love Lily Mithen. I think she's an absolute superstar. As I said in a couple of podcasts, I want to know what she's made out of, because she is small, she is tiny, but she goes for it. She gets absolutely smashed, gets up and is right back in it. I love that about her. So you said you're a foundation member, so I know you keep an eye on it. What were your thoughts of Melbourne's season this last year, and how excited are you for this next year's Melbourne team? Because they legitimately have a wonderful, great list this year.
I do, and with the addition of Taylor Harris is back home, because she played in the exhibition games. Because I was following the the women's comp. I remember back in 2013 when Melbourne and Western Bulldogs were doing the exhibition games prior to the men's games, and promoting girls playing football. And I am so passionate about women's footy. I absolutely am passionate about it. I remember as a kid in the 70s and seeing girls in the Little League. This is before I was kicking everything. Seeing the girls in the Little League and saying to Dad, I want to do that. I want to do the Little League. I want to do I want to play footy as well. And Dad's always saying, you can't do that. You're a girl. And that was, I mean, it broke my heart because my mum used to play footy in the backyard with my brother, and we'd make up our own rules because it was just the two of us, and we would use the tree here and the wheelie bin there and all that kind of stuff for the goals and stuff like that. And it was just the two of us. And you know, I used to love doing those kind of things, even though he was bigger and 3 years older than me, and he'd trounce me every time. I can't guarantee I would have been any good at playing footy, but I would have loved to have had that opportunity. So to see girls now having that as a pathway and seeing that they can grow up to be the next, you know, Taylor Harris or the next Daisy Pearce is just great for me. As far as Melbourne chances, I think the first couple of seasons, Melbourne were really incredibly unlucky. They missed out in the finals the first 2 years. And in fact, there wasn't really a final season. It was just like the top two teams in the table went straight into the grand final. And Melbourne missed out on both those times purely on percentage. And that was pretty heartbreaking. When the conference system came in, when the expansion teams were getting bigger and bigger, and it did not make sense to me, that conference system, because you had one Conference A that was incredibly stronger than Conference B, and Melbourne missing out on finals to the top two place in Conference B, who'd won less games than Melbourne and had a lower percentage, made no sense to me whatsoever. I was so furious about that. It just seemed like, you know, Melbourne can't catch a trick here. They're just being missed out. They're being cheated of being in the finals pretty much every year so far with the AFLW, and that was pretty heartbreaking. So then in 2020, when we finally made the finals and then it got called off because of COVID, that was frustrating. So we had a real genuine chance this year, and they had a fantastic season. It was such a close season. Yeah, the top four teams, same number of points. It was purely only percentage that was separating them. So that Melbourne unfortunately finished fourth, even though they were pretty much all four teams were equal top, and beat all other teams in the top three during the home and away season. It was pretty, you know, they were just underplayed in that preliminary final. You couldn't take that away from Adelaide. They play sensational, but the girls are hungry, and I think we've got a real chance. I don't know if you've seen it at all on YouTube or Melbourne's social media. There was a clip that Melbourne put on their social media thing of when Kate Roffey, our president, took the men's premiership cup along to a training session and addressed the girls, the women's team there. And it's such an incredibly inspirational speech that Kate gave the girls, and spoke about some of the values within the club, the selflessness of the men's team and things like that. And you can see the looks on the faces in the women's team. They're hungry, and they were so inspired also by what Kate Roffey was saying to them. But that's the club, you know, that's what the club has become. It's just really been about, people think about Melbourne being the high-end toffee sort of club, because that was the original origins of the club, being coming out of the cricket club and everything like that. But it's become, you know, I love the way that it's evolved and the values within the club, and it's become very inclusive. It's become very progressive. We're one of only 3 clubs in the competition with a woman president, which I love. And I went to the women's best and fairest back in April this year, and I had a chance to have a long conversation with Kate Roffey. And this is what I love as well. You've got a president of the club that makes herself available to members, and makes herself available and open to those kind of meet and greets and things like that. It was just incidental, you know, it just happened to be at the best and fairest. And I love the way that the club makes the members a part of the team, whether or not you're in the AFLW or whether or not you're a regular member. And they've now got a reward system now happening for length of memberships. And I saw that members like me that's been a member for over 30 years are going to be invited to an afternoon tea at the club with players in attendance and probably with Kate Roffey and things like that as well. And I just thought that is the way that you do it, I think, and keeping that inclusiveness and keeping that engagement happening thing. And you mentioned before earlier about that suburban ground feel in the AFLW, and it does feel like that. There's a different, there's definitely that kind of camaraderie in the AFLW community that is a bit different to the men's, in that it doesn't seem to matter who you barrack for in the AFLW. The supporters, the players are so thrilled that to have that women's competition now happening, that it doesn't seem to matter who we barrack for. Everyone is just part of that same community, and we're all supportive of each other. And there's not that same kind of my team's better than yours sort of thing that you sometimes get in the men's comp, but it's a real kind of sense of joy in that community, in the AFLW community. And you can definitely feel it when you go to the games.
I'm hoping one of these days when I get down to Australia, I can catch a women's game as well. In
I'll
fact,
take you to the Red Legs room. I'll take you up to the Red Legs room for the women's game if you come.
That would be fine. In fact, actually, I haven't said this on any of my episodes yet. I actually did sign up as a foundation member for the Swans women's team as well.
Now all 18 clubs are going to have a women's team. How brilliant is that?
Exactly. In fact, I actually was part of a Twitter montage of people reacting to signing up for and the Swans actually put my tweet up there, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. I was losing my mind that they actually used my tweet, which I thought was pretty cool, but I have made sure and double checked. In fact, I just got my renewal email recently from the Swans, and my AFL Foundation membership is part of it. So I'm very excited for that. I cannot wait. This season's going to be bittersweet for me because we don't have it, but it'll be fun. I cannot wait.
And I think that there's one thing as well that when COVID hit last year, and it was particularly hard on the Victorian clubs because Melbourne had its the big lockdown last year, and we had no crowds at all at any of the home and away games throughout the entire season last year. And some of the clubs were experiencing some members who might have, lost their jobs and things like that, who say, look, I'd love to be involved in the club, but I just can't afford it. I just lost my job because of COVID or whatever. Melbourne and Collingwood were the two teams that actually experienced the least number of dropouts of memberships because of COVID. And I think a lot of that was because a lot of the supporters were very conscious of the fact that, there's one thing about buying a membership so you can go to the games. Mm-hmm. It's quite another thing for members to think, I'm buying a membership because it's financially supporting the club, because that is the primary source of income for these clubs, is selling the membership. Because that, they're not-for-profit organisations, as I was saying before. And so a lot of supporters are really conscious of that and saying, well, the clubs are finding it tough. They're losing heaps of revenue because they're not having crowds. They need every dollar that they can get at the moment. And there were even supporters who were ringing up their clubs, and I did it with Melbourne too. And I actually rang up the club to say, look, I understand that, some people might be struggling, things like that, and keeping their memberships alive. I would be willing to pay for a membership of a supporter if they wanted to keep it alive. And actually people were doing that in order to keep members connected to the club and things like that. I was in a position to do it. I was fully employed as a teacher. And so I was able to, and the club would say, well, great, we'll actually give you a call and let you know if someone does buy that membership. I never got that call because Melbourne, as I said before, had experienced the least number of members dropouts because of COVID. But I know that some clubs did experience that aspect of it, but it wasn't really for reasons of, well, I'm not going to support my club because I can't go. people have definitely got that understanding of what it means to be a member and what that membership actually does for the club. And
Yeah.
I think that really makes that community. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes tons of sense. I remember getting an email from the Swan saying, if you're having issues with COVID and you would like a refund for your membership. And I remember replying back going, no. I said, I'm good.
Exactly.
I have no problem with that. I said, I said, keep it. I said, I know you guys need it a lot more. I said, I'm financially stable. I'm good. So I have no problem. So I have like a badge that they sent me for the 2020 members that had stayed on. They had sent a
Yeah,
specific
you've got a
badge
badge
kind of,
too. You've got a badge of 2020 members, a
yep.
badge, yeah.
Yeah. So that was really, really cool for them to do that. So, and I've, like I said, I've never regretted joining it. And that's always been kind of my favorite thing about it. So
Let me show you something here.
sure.
Now, I've got it here. We had a dress up day at school the other day, so I was wearing it at work.
Awesome.
This jumper here, this is the members jumper. Every now and again, Melbourne does a members type jumper thing. And so you, as a member, as a fundraiser for the club, and they did this last year for COVID for the Proud to Belong campaign thing. And so they had an old 90s pre-seasons design for that one with the old logo on it. But if you look very, very closely, you'll see that there's a whole bunch of names that's been printed on it. So what that is that as a member, you could actually pay $250 to get your name printed on the jumper. And as part of that $250, that jumper, you'll get a jumper sent to you. So you could not buy these jumpers retail. You only got one of these if your name was on it. So my name is on it. I actually did that. And there was a story I mentioned beforehand about my dad and I going to his last ever game, which was around 23. In 2018, that was Melbourne's 160th year as a club, and they did a special members jumper for that game. And again, I said, oh, wow, they've got them. That was the first time I saw them do that, was putting the names on the jumpers. And so Dad and I were talking about, we should do that one time, get the names on the jumper. Because that'd be really cool, because they were wearing the jumper with the members' names on it. So and so Dad and I were having that conversation that day, and I was against GWS that day. And so last year when that came up again, and Dad had died in June in 2019, and and I saw that they were doing it again for the Proud to Belong campaign, is to raise money for the lost revenue from COVID. And so I rang the club and said, can I actually would it be stretching it to have Ian and Katrina Oxley on it? Because, and I told the story of Dad passing and all that kind of stuff in that day. And he was like, leave it with me. And he called me back a couple of days later and said, I managed to swing it. So you've got two separate entries, but it's for the same price of the $250. So Dad's name was on it. So when I went to my brother's for grand final night, and I brought along that jumper as well, and we hung it up in the room. I explained to Andrew and Tina, that's the jumper with Dad's name on it. So Tina grabbed the coat hanger and she hung it up on the curtain rod. So Dad had a presence in the grand final because the name of the jumper was on it. Those kind of little things, it may seem something quite little, having your name on a jumper like that. But the fact that Dad and I had that conversation and what it means for members, it really does have that sense of connection to the club. And it really does, it's meaningful.
Yep, it brings emotion, and it's nothing but a good thing. So we'll move on. I'm going to have a few fun questions to kind of end our chat. I know you haven't been to a ton of games. Again, unfortunately, COVID has really been kind of a pain in the what. But when you do go to the footy, what is your go-to food to have at a game of footy?
Oh, it's got to be meat pie.
There's nothing wrong with that.
We're in the Red League, so we do have we do have kitchen facilities in the Red Leagues room at the MCG. So occasionally I had played a gnocchi or something like that, or a chicken schnitzel or something like that. But you got to have a meat pie and a Coke at the footy.
Mm-hmm.
You gotta. If I'm sitting with a cheer squad, that's what I'll do. I'll have a meat pie.
That's awesome. I don't know. Did you get a chance to see online? I actually made homemade meat. I made homemade meat pies here
Are you
for the
serious? What did you
grand
think of
final.
it?
They are awesome.
Yeah,
I found a YouTuber that is an Australian
yeah,
who had a recipe out there, and it was kind of a how to make it. And so I had always wanted to for the grand final, because I thought, what better way to do it for the grand final is make an Aussie meat pie. So I, like, the night before, made them, put them in the warmer, and then the game started at 3:30 my time, and I tossed
yeah.
them in the warmer at about 3 o'clock, at about 3:15, let them warm up for 15 minutes. And then this channel, actually, we have an internet kind of streaming channel, so we watched the grand final, and I had a meat pie with me as I watched it. And I can't tell you how many Australians were like, "You are a legend for doing that." In fact, I
Yeah,
had one.
absolutely.
My my
That is a huge commitment to do that.
Yeah, I had one say, "You need a passport for that. You need an Australian passport
Yeah,
for doing
you're
that."
actually probably for that.
Yeah, so I took pride in that a lot. Alrighty, so I know you have.
Have with tomatoes, ketchup, tomato sauce.
Unfortunately, we have only have ketchup on this. Unfortunately, I know
Yeah,
there's a
just sweeter.
difference. So
There was a difference. Ketchup is a little bit sweeter than tomato
and
sauce.
that's what I've heard, that ketchup is a little, I think it has
Yeah.
a little bit of sugar in it. So I think that's what kind of changes the taste a little bit. All right. So I know you have specific seats with your memberships, and you're part of the Red Lakes and everything like that. But do you have an ideal place that you like to watch the footy when you go?
Oh, I mean, I do always enjoy going to that particular spot in the southern stand at the MCG. When we first joined Red Legs, we were actually sitting on the wing in the old northern stand, but that was before that old southern stand was pulled down and rebuilt. That used to be right next to the old members pavilion. I do think it's a bit sad that there none of the stands, like there's no stand there at the MCG now older than 1992. I do think that's a little bit sad because, you know, I remember the old southern stand. I remember the old northern stand that was built for the 1956 Olympics, and the old Ponsford stand that was built in 67. But where Red Legs is right behind the goals. It's on the second level up, right behind the goals on the punt road end of the MCG. And Cheers Squad is directly underneath. So either of those two places, whether I'm sitting with my Ruby Demons friends in Red Legs, or I decide to go with the Cheers Squad, which is down the bottom, I'll be either of those two places there. And they're generally behind the goal. Best place really is to watch a game on the wing, but they're the places that we go for Red Legs and Cheers Squad.
Oh, alrighty.
And
Now,
that's really good with my friends.
yeah, and as long as you enjoy it, that's all that matters to
Yeah.
me. I know when I go, I want to do like second tier, either behind the goals or like midfield. So because I want to be able to see the movement. The one thing that being on the TV that you can't see is it's always ball focus, and you can't see how the forward line is adjusting when the ball is in the forward half. It's my coaching brain a little bit. I want to see the movement patterns a little bit more. So that's
And
one of the things I
really good for that. And the
exactly,
second level is actually really good for because you're not too high that you're watching ants. And that's what I
exactly.
don't. I don't like being on the fourth level at the MCG because it is really high. I mean, you're talking 100,000 seat stadium there. You're really high up there.
Mhm.
And I always feel like and it's really quite steep, and I feel like I'm going to fall forward and off the grandstand if I'm up there. But that's why I do like the second level because you are that elevated. Where the Red Legs is, that's exactly where the Channel 7 camera is. So
Mhm.
you see the camera right on that, right behind those goals. Yeah.
Alrighty, and I was kind of telling you this before we started on camera, is that this channel is based out of the U.S. It does NFL, different things like that. So occasionally we get American fans that maybe you'll click on a video, maybe they click on this video and they've gotten to this point. So I have one of those. Do you have a really quick pitch for maybe an American fan of why they should be a Demon supporter?
Um, why they've got it? I mean, if it wasn't for Melbourne, we wouldn't have footy. Is probably the first answer I think of. They are the oldest club. They are the club that's got the pioneer club there. But I think because we had that 57-year drought. And, you know, you can't exactly call Melbourne the underdogs now because we won the premiership this year. But for 57 years, for my entire life, they have always been seen as the underdogs. And that was despite all that massive history that led up to it. One thing that Melbourne, as Melbourne supporters, we're very, very conscious of is that the club has got a very, very rich history, and it's an absolute oh, there's my cat. It's an absolute it does feel like a privilege to be part of the Melbourne community in that sense, because to be a part of that history and part of that culture that Melbourne has. It you know, because I mean, my dad's very first game that he ever went to was the 1948 grand final replay as a 10-year-old. And it was from that point on that he became a Melbourne supporter. So Dad was there when all throughout the 50s, that they were in every grand final over that over a 10-year, you know, well, they were in every single final series for 10 years, but they were in every grand final from 1954 through to 1960 and won 5 of those 7 flags, including a three-peat and a back-to-back. And they're the only team that's got 2 three-peats in their history. It's just when you're a part of Melbourne, you're a part of something that is more than just a club. It's part of, it really gets into your blood in some ways. It really does. There's a great video that Melbourne did last year on their social media for part of their Proud to Belong campaign. And it's not just about how, I always say to people, it's how we as footy fans do feel about football and how it is part of our lives, but it definitely has particular Melbourne feel about it. And it really does have that essence about it.
And that's great. And that's one of the things I've told a few people. I said that the Demons are one of those teams I always kind of had a little soft spot for, because they are the oldest club running in all of footy and all that. So I like I said, I was very happy that they won the grand final this year. So I always like to end these episodes with a fun question. And just because I love hearing the different answers, what is your favorite game of footy you have ever seen? It doesn't have to be a Demons game, but what is your favorite game of footy you have ever seen, whether live, whether at the ground or on television? Favorite game of footy?
Oh my God, there's so many over the years. Oh, I will pick just one.
You can do a couple if you want. That's fine.
I mean, I think this year's grand final is going to be amongst it because of what it meant. And the fact that, you know, I did 10 minutes of ugly crying at the end of it. And I also did at the end of round 23 this year when after Max Gorn's goal after the siren. Did you see that? That was unbelievable.
I did. That was an insane round, considering Port played Western, Port only beat Western Bulldogs by 1, and then you guys have the kick after the siren. I'm like, well, the 2 top 4 teams played really good games.
I think probably I'm going to go with something a little bit out there, actually. I'm going to go with round 23, 1987. Melbourne were playing Western Bulldogs. Oh, they were called then Footscray. And both of those teams were vying for the last, in those days, it was only a top 5 in the finals. It wasn't, because there were only, 14 teams in the VFL, it was as it was back then. Melbourne were playing Western Oval. Before it was called Whitten Oval, it was called Western Oval. And now the situation was there were 3 clubs that were vying for that 5th spot. There was Melbourne, Geelong and Footscray. Melbourne and Footscray were playing for each other. And Geelong were playing Hawthorn at Cardinia Park down in Geelong. And Hawthorn were top of the ladder. And we thought, well, all Hawthorn have to do is beat Geelong and, you know, and all we have to do is beat Footscray and we're in. This was also Robbie Flower's last year before he was going to retire as well. So it was really meaningful. It was the first time that Melbourne were going to make the finals since it was the first time that Melbourne had made the finals that year since the 1964 grand final, which of course they won. But winning, to get into the finals was, it was that first time in 23 years. So what was surprised everybody is that Geelong were absolutely killing Hawthorn at Kardinia Park that day. And it sounded like the whole of Melbourne was interesting. Both games were on at the same time. This is when pretty much most games were on Saturday afternoon. And we were watching. So what the coaches at Melbourne were telling them, they actually lied to the Melbourne players that day and said, like, it's okay. Hawthorn are well ahead at Geelong. All you have to do is win and you're in. But that wasn't the case at all. Geelong had the jump on Hawthorn, and they were winning. And but it wasn't until halfway through the last quarter that, even towards the end of that fourth quarter, Hawthorn were getting their run back up, and they were clawing back. And so everyone, said like the whole of Melbourne were on the edge of their seats. What was going on at Melbourne? And that league was changing all the time. And what was happening at down in Geelong. And it got to the dying stages of that fourth quarter. And Melbourne had just hit the front. And so there's like, and the players were not they thought they were going to be in. Well, all they had to do was win. They had no idea what was going on at Geelong. And then halfway through, there's a couple of minutes left in the last quarter, and Hawthorn had just hit the front at Geelong. And all of a sudden, because people in the crowd at Western Oval were listening to both games, listening to the other game. And as soon as Hawthorn hit the front, the whole crowd erupted and started cheering. And play momentarily stopped on the ground because the players thought the siren had gone. And they realised, no, the siren hadn't gone. We've still got to play footy. And so when Melbourne did win, and it was absolutely certain then that Melbourne were the ones that got their fifth spot in the finals, and Geelong and Footscray both missed out. They weren't told until the end of the game what the situation was. And they were like, oh, shit. But that was probably because it was such an emotional roller coaster. It was that round in 1987 that probably stands out to me. I was only 16. If you're going to think worst, the preliminary final in that same year, and I can't even talk about it. It's too devastating.
We won't make you remember that one. Yeah. So it's always the favorite. Always the favorite one.
Look it up. Preliminary final 87. Yeah, you can.
We'll do. Yeah. Well, this has been an awesome conversation. I love the history that you have and the connection that you have to the club. It's absolutely amazing. This has been a fantastic conversation. I know we went back and forth on Twitter a little bit getting ready for this. Yes. And you were one of them that I was super excited to talk with because there was so much history. So thank you so much for hopping on. I genuinely appreciate this.
Not a problem, Donnie. I really enjoyed today.
I have thoroughly too. We will definitely keep in touch. Who knows? Maybe we can have some fun chit-chatting back and forth next year when Sydney plays Melbourne. Okay.
Yeah, and I've got to say as well, I have a huge respect for Sydney. Their cheer squad helped us out big time this year with the Queen's Birthday match, and I think us in the Melbourne cheer squad will always be thankful for Sydney's cheer squad for helping us that day with getting the banner and everything for the players to run through for both Melbourne and Collingwood's cheer squads. And I certainly know that in the Melbourne cheer squad, it's not something that we'll ever forget, the way that you guys helped us out. And that's what gets back to what I was saying before about that footy community.
Yeah, in fact, actually, I will relay that message tomorrow. I am interviewing a member of that Sydney supporter, the supporter group, Sarah, who I know very, very well. I'm very happy to talk with her tomorrow. So I will definitely relay that thank you to her when I chat with her tomorrow. So ladies and gentlemen, this has been another episode in my fan series, another awesome chat. As you can see, so much history in the AFL. I have more to come. This is very, very early in it. Many, many more to come. Keep an eye on it, and we will be back very, very soon with more episodes in this series. Thank you again, Kat. Have a wonderful day, okay?
Thank you. And thank you very much, Donnie, and you too.
No problem.